Now, amid the conflict there with Israel, Iranian leaders have cut internet access across the country, leading to essentially a near total national internet blackout. As a result, Iranians have spent nearly half of the current week-long conflict with Israel in a near communication blackout, unable to connect with the outside world and with their neighbors and loved ones. I want to discuss all of this and the significance overall, so let's bring in Janatan Sayeh, Iran research analyst at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for taking the time, as always, to be here with us.
The pleasure is all mine, Josh. Great to be with you.
Thank you. And of course, I did want to ask what Iran's objective is here by cutting off the internet across the nation to most folks there.
Well, in short, they're trying to dominate the media atmosphere inside Iran. They're trying to shelter Iranians from any outside news and information. And by doing so, they will monopolize the Iranian access to information, specifically ensuring that all Iranians, because of the shutdown, would strictly be limited to the state broadcasting, effectively the regime's propaganda apparatus. So because of that, that's mostly signals the regime's great fear of potential unrest. When they go to this extent of actually shutting down the internet entirely, that means they're perhaps anticipating some sort of domestic backlash.
Could this blackout that is happening and has been going on for days here, could that actually maybe work in reverse? Could it backfire by fostering rumors, undermining public trust in Iranian authorities, any of that?
It has the potential to do that. I think one angle of looking at it is specifically Israel's counter-messaging and Israel's operations that are mostly in the information sphere against the regime. So on one angle, you see the Israelis, specifically the IDF in Persian, posting content in the Persian language for Iranians, trying to undermine the regime's propaganda. So by shutting down the internet, Iranians no longer have access to this counter information. However, what the Israelis did was they at one point hacked the state broadcast of the Iranian national IRIB is what it's called. And by doing so, they actually aired different waves of protests inside Iran, urging Iranians that their time is now. So this broad campaign, I think, from the Israeli perspective, seeks to undermine the regime efforts of further censorship. In addition to that, the Israelis actually targeted a specific newsroom within the IRB, again, signaling to the Iranians that if you continue to shut down the internet to this extent, we have other means of either undermining your efforts or providing our narrative for your public.
I want to ask how this blackout during this conflict here kind of compares historically to past information shutdowns. I know we've seen over the years as these have happened, I believe if my years are correct, we're talking 2019, 2011. How does this kind of compare?
Absolutely. So it first started in 2009. And, back in the day, I was still in Tehran, so I remember it vividly. So what we've seen before 2022, which was the Women Life Freedom Movement, one of the most major uprisings, what we saw in mostly 2019, like you mentioned, 2017 and 2009 was total internet shutdown. And the consequence of that was, of course, on an economic level, it really crippled the Iranian economy as a whole, because, of course, Iranians were no longer able to advertise their products, and it just hindered their ability to make purchases online or be able to use cabs or order food or anything of that nature. On a security level as well, the regime itself relies on the internet for communication and to be able to coordinate different strategies amongst regime officials. So from that perspective, that was no longer a viable option for them to totally shut down internet. So what we saw post 2017, 18, and by 2022 is what we call internet throttling, which is just limiting internet access in certain areas. So if there's a protest happening in X city, then they would proceed with shutting down the internet in that area or perhaps disrupting internet flows. So what we see right now, again, for them to revert back to their 2019 strategy means they have great fears of potential civic unrest across the country following Israel's campaign against regime targets across the country.
Are there any signs as of right now, as this does continue more than a week now, that essentially there's growing civil unrest, resistance to the blackout within Iran, any of that?
We still are able to get some information out of Iran, mostly related to Starlink, because of course they're not able to prevent that just yet. There are a few Starlink I guess servers, if you will, active across Iran that were smuggled in, mostly through international NGOs. So because of that, we're getting some information. And the information is telling us that, yes, Iranians as a whole see this mostly as the war imposed on them by the Islamic Republic because of their nuclear program and their efforts of weaponization. So from the ordinary Iranian's perspective, Israel is targeting their oppressors. So if you look at the recent waves of assassinations, these are people that were, in addition to attacking Israel with the ballistic missiles and causing terror, also in the United States, they also were oppressing Iranian people and civic activism inside. So we are seeing a moment where Israelis and ordinary Iranians are perhaps working against a common adversary, which is the regime.
What about when you talk about surrounding countries as well? Because we know this blackout is impacting Iran and the civilians, but is it impacting other surrounding areas as well?
It indirectly does. So on a trade level, like we discussed earlier, of course, if the internet is shut down internally, then any form of communication to neighboring countries, Iraq, Turkey, any trucks or any sort of supply chain that relies on regional networks, that would be undermined. So in that capacity, it does. But another angle is to look at foreigners inside Iran. So this internet shutdown is actually preventing different foreign nationals who are residing in the country, whether they're Afghan refugees or perhaps diplomats. We see various embassies shutting down their operations inside Iran and having people mostly leave the country through Azerbaijan. So again, this is really a strategy that has concerned a lot of Westerners inside the country, and they see this perhaps as a long-term operation from the regime's perspective to further limit information. Perhaps they're anticipating more unrest across different cities in Iran.
Thank you so much for providing some context here and helping to discuss this. As of right now, it's not clear if this is going to continue or what the future does hold. But is there anything else that you want to add here specifically? I know you have some personal experience and all of that. So anything you want to add about any of this before I let you go?
I think it would be interesting to see whether the operations against regime officials actually does escalate to the point of the supreme leader, and whether he would also be eliminated, and whether Israelis or Americans have a day after plan. Of course, there is widespread discontent against the regime. There are viable oppositions out here in DC that are very, very nationalistic and aligned with Western values. So it is really a matter of what the strategy would be moving forward if the regime were to collapse, and whether that is in fact part of the tactic from the One Jerusalem and Washington side.
All right. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. We appreciate it as always.
Thank you for having me.